So welcome to Tree of Life Connection. My name is Dr. Jennifer Sankey, and today we're talking about freedom from addiction. Joining me today is Sandra Wilkerson, and she's going to introduce herself and tell you more about what she does to help individuals with addiction. Our goal during this session is actually to just give you an awareness that people are addicted to various things and they struggle with it. It's not an easy thing that they are able to overcome. But we want to give you some kind of just some helpful hints of how you can support them, or if you have the addiction yourself, what resources are available for you. Welcome, Dr. Wilkerson.
Hi, Dr. Sankey.
So we're so glad that you're here today. We just want to hear a little bit about yourself.
Okay, I am actually a licensed marriage and family therapist, and I've been doing that for quite some time. Went to a graduate program in marriage and family therapy, so kind of exclusively learned how to work with people in the framework of their relationships, interpersonal relationships. And along the way, I actually started my career in substance abuse. That actually led me to choosing a marriage and family therapy program because I saw how family relationships and dynamics really contributed to addiction. So here in the state of Florida, they have different levels of certifications for addictions professionals. I am actually a master certified addiction professional. It's the highest certification for addiction professionals in the state of Florida. So, and I've worked in diverse settings throughout my career, not just in addictions. I've worked, if you name it, I've probably done it. But currently, I am working at an addictions detox program. The clientele is primarily opiate abusers, alcohol abusers. Is 3 to 5 short stay, just to kind of get a person stabilized when they decide they don't want to use. So I do get the opportunity to still do a little therapy with people, but I'm in a leadership role there now to kind of ensure that these services will be provided to people who are seeking treatment, who may not have resources or insurance. So I feel like I'm on a blessed mission most days. It's like my little journey, my mission right now. So that's a little bit about who I am, what I do, and where I do it.
And certainly you are the right person to have this discussion with me today to really talk about addiction. So when we talk about addictions, how do you really define addictions? I mean, many people make assumptions about what that means, but, tell me more about how would you define addictions?
Okay, so Dr. Sandra's definition of addiction is a coping strategy gone really, really, really bad. Because most of us have stressors in our lives and we learn how to cope. We learn how to self-soothe. We learn how to escape temporarily. But at some point, these coping strategies that we use become unhealthy. They become destructive. So for example, you get in a car accident, and I hear this story quite often. You're in a car accident and you're prescribed a painkiller, Percocets, morphine, and you are given this medication to help you cope with physical pain. But along the way, you find that it not only helps you cope with physical pain, it helps you escape completely. So you continue to use it outside of the framework that you were supposed to use it in. So you become addicted to an opiate. Other addictions, and there are other ones, but I mean, to me, coping strategy gone bad is sugar. I think that's one of the most harmful addictions. It's not nearly as destructive as an opiate addiction, unless you're diabetic. It can be very destructive to your mind, body, and soul. But it's like you sit down with that little tub of ice cream and you're going to have one serving and you keep eating it because it feels really, really good.
Yes.
Coping strategy going bad. So there are all types of addictions. Anything, we know the common ones: drugs, alcohol, sex, shopping, retail therapy, yes, video games, our little iPhones. But you can also be addicted to love, relationships, exercise. I think most of us would love to be addicted to exercise, but that can even go really, really bad. For some people, pain. People can get addicted to the feeling of pain. So I think if we keep in mind that everything in moderation, So my best definition of addiction is a coping strategy gone really, 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 really bad.
So, it's interesting. And I really absolutely appreciate you talking about sugar and shopping and, those things that people really kind of, put underneath the rug, and they don't equate them the same as they would opioids or alcohol or smoking or anything like that. But certainly it can certainly have a similar effect when you cannot control your behavior. When you're like this,
Exactly.
you lose control of being able to stop shopping or to come off of Amazon or to, stop shopping in the local stores even. And
Or
so,
when you don't have money and you're still shopping, it's like you have it becomes like an impulse control thing. You're just overriding
yeah,
everything that tells me to stop. Like I won't be able to pay my bills
yeah,
next month if I continue to shop. And so that's when it becomes destructive to you and your relationships and all those other important aspects, mind, body, spirit.
sure. And I'm glad you mentioned that because many times we don't realize that what we do affects other people. So you mentioned some triggers that happen, particularly with opioids. You talked about many times people were in a car accident or maybe had surgery, and that triggered them getting on that journey of addiction, that they found that it helps them mentally feel better or give them a high or kind of escape for a little bit. So what are some of the, what do you think may contribute to shopping addiction or um, sugar addiction? What are some of those things that you maybe could be triggers for that?
I one sometimes I think there is really a brain thing going on. Some of us are predisposed to, a genetic predisposition to addiction. So anything basically that's going to make you feel good and or not feel, we have an affinity towards that.
Mhm.
So a trigger could be anything, a bad day, a craving. In the case of alcohol or drugs, sometimes it's a craving. You have a stressor and then you start craving, which is a physiological response. It's almost like, we all learned about Pavlov's dogs, and they hear the bell ringing and they start having these physiological responses because they want something. But generally it's something that stresses. It's a stressor for you, whether it's physical pain, emotional pain, mental pain, anguish, anything like that. And you have not figured out how to exercise a healthy coping strategy. So, if you have a bad day at work, you get in your car. Most of us, when we are, on our game, I'll get in the car, I'll put on some gospel music and it'll de-escalate me. Some people they leave from work, go straight to happy hour and then get drunk. So, and oftentimes what I have found is that oftentimes people don't even know the triggers because so many things are bombarding us during the day that they don't slow down enough. So a lot of times it's like, let's slow down. What happened? What was the ripple effect to
Yeah.
actually get to the point where you chose to do something that was going to have some dire consequences. And so there's a lot of rhetoric about, well, with alcohol, drugs, sometimes it's not a choice, a lot of brain research going on there, but it is, slowing down to figure out what your trigger is. As a relationship therapist, a lot of times it's something in our past that got triggered that we probably never dealt with. So it kind of hinders us from really having that conscious moment. I got triggered. I'm not sure. And when you slow people down, especially, when I did marriage counseling, it was like, okay, so what did this remind you of?
Yeah.
If we slow down and before you know it, you're just triggered. And I just love the word triggered.
Well, I appreciate you talking about that things sometimes happen in our past that we may not even realize have triggered that behavior until we stop and reflect on our past. But I do think that one thing that you mentioned that I really, really appreciate is that every day we are going to be faced with stressors. That's a reality. And how we cope
Yes.
with those stressors is a choice. And then we need to look at, do we need to change maybe some of our environments? So if we continue to go to happy hour and be around those same people, it's going to be really, really difficult to break that addiction or to free ourselves from that because we're in the environment with the people who are doing what we really don't want to do. that we're hoping that we can break away from. But, I do know that addictions affect families, it affects friends, it affects our health. So what are some of the things that you would say how a family member or friend that's concerned, about this person with addiction, what is their role? What can they do without even triggering them more? Because many people who have addictions, number one, they may admit it, but they deny, help. So tell me, what would
Yes.
you suggest?
I one of the things that I suggest, especially working with family members who has someone who's struggling with addiction, is to exercise compassion, try to develop empathy, and learn to hold space. We know the things that don't work, pursuing them, interrogating them, um, treating them like children. And a lot of times people are put in those situations to kind of help someone. But along the way, I think people have to begin to realize that, like my clients say, it's not your dog in the fight. You
Mhm.
don't, this is, we could, a person has an addiction you- has to own it so they can resolve it, heal from it. There's a saying, and I'm gonna see if I can get it right. Addiction is not your fault, but it is your responsibility to fix. So people around them want to be helpful, um, and they end up doing more harm than good, pushing the person away, making the person go inward more. So to try to create an environment that's safe, so when the person does decide to talk with you, you don't sound critical or judgmental or unempathic. Or so it is just learning to, I guess the easiest way for me to say it, and I think people will grasp, is to learn to manage your own anxieties.
Mhm.
Because a lot of times it's really, really hard for us to sit back and watch people make bad choices. But
Yes.
what's really going on is a lot of times, yes, we're concerned about them, but because we're relational beings, we are concerned about how their choices are going to impact our being.
Yeah.
So we become anxious. So a lot of times, if we learn to manage our own anxieties about it, we'll be able to be at that place of peace, and we can be open and receptive. So when that person has gotten to that place on their journey and they want to share, they want to disclose, they want your help,
Right.
then they don't have to worry about it being a request that's fallen on the ears of somebody who just want to, from their perception, tear them down.
Yes. So, and I do know how frustrating that family members many times, because the addiction may affect the family, by taking resources out of the home.
Yes.
So if it's a spouse that's spending the money when the bill should be paid, how do you address those situations? Or maybe it's a child who's staying at home and the parent is now having to, not necessarily support the habit, but see their child going through that addiction that is so destructive. And there are times that people end up in the hospital because of their addiction.
That is a very, very tough question. And most people generally don't like the answer that I have,
Mhm.
but it's called boundaries
Okay.
and self care. You know, most of us think if we just love a person hard enough, they will see things our way. And I am in no way an advocate of just cutting people off, but sometimes you have to be able to erect boundaries and maintain boundaries. When no means no, it means no. Um, People with addictions have a gift of manipulation. And they have a way to create an environment where they will make you feel as if it is your fault that they're living a certain way. And at some point, that person has to erect the boundaries and maintain them. And sometimes the outcome might not be what you want. It might be a divorce. It might have your child might end up homeless. I take solace in the fact that I'm a Christian, and not everybody I work with is a Christian, but sometimes you really have to give them to God. You have to give God his children back so he can help heal them, and in the meantime heal you, because kind of believe that sometimes these situations are created, and we need to sit back and say, what am I doing to contribute to these behaviors, these thoughts? and give everybody some room to breathe. So it's really, really hard. I was talking to a young lady today, and she was just like, my dad he has put me in so many different apartments, or no, he paid for motels, and I would just have people coming over because I would get lonely. And my dad just said, no more. I can't do this anymore. And I think he meant it that time, but it's really tough. And of course, I would encourage find someone to talk to. Therapy works for everybody. Sometimes we got to kiss a few frogs before we find the right therapist. But that family member who's really struggling with those boundaries, they need to go. They need to go heal themselves, and they can. There are resources out like Al-Anon. I forgot what they're the support groups for people who love people with addictions. So it's real complicated, and there's not a real easy answer. It is really an individual based, because you don't always know what's going on behind the scenes. And you need a lot of times, through therapy, I find out what's really going on, why it's really hard for this person to let go. And then you realize it's like, okay, so you're going to have to forgive yourself. You're going to have to deal with the guilt, or there was someone else and they loved that died, and they don't know how. They're so fearful that this addiction is going to repeat itself. So just cling too tightly. So you start to realize it's like everybody in the system needs to heal and take a step back.
So, I appreciate you talking about the family needing to find a therapist, because many times we think that help is for those who are addicted to whatever that is, but then we don't think about that in order for us to be able to help them, we also may need to actually have support from a therapist who can lead and guide and talk us through boundaries, provide space.
Yes, a quick story. So I actually started off doing individual therapy, and I walked away from it because I worked in residential settings, and I would see people in treatment for long periods of time. They'd be there 3 months, 6 months, 2 months, or however long, and they would get out, and then within days they would relapse. And because I was a novice therapist then, I found that to be incredibly profound. You just left here, you're ready for the world. You go home and you relapse. And a lot of times people keep coming back. And what I learned was that what you're saying, families want the other person to go get fixed. Well, if you just stop using, if you stop spending all the money, if you stop gambling, if you stay off the pornography, everything will be good. And that person will stop. But when they go back into a system that has not changed, they relapse, because what happens with families, and I'll just use an example because it's easier for me to just kind of talk, first person. So and then let's say I went off to treatment because I had a problem. I went to treatment for 2 or 3 months, and my husband was left here to take care of the kids, do things the way he wanted to do them. I come home clean, sober, and I want my place back in the family as mom. I want to help with homework. I want to be able to discipline. Well, guess who don't want that? Dad doesn't really want that because he was doing it for so long while I was out there using, while I was in treatment. So the family often resists the change. And so the person goes back to coping the way they used to and relapse. And so I got to the point, I was like, I don't ever want to work with individuals. I want to work with the families, because I see how genuine and sincere people are when they come into treatment. But if the family system does not change and adapt and correct and learn new communication styles, it will revert back to what we call homeostasis. Okay. It want to stay the same.
Right. Well, and I think that, this conversation is not had enough, because I'm sure in every single family, there's someone who has some type of an addiction. And many times we want to turn our head the other way and pretend it's not really happening. And it can be very destructive. And what I have found sometimes is that, they may give up drinking or drugs or whatever, but they sway into another type of addiction, because that's just their behavior, addictive type behavior. Let's say they were drinking or drugs, then they swing into maybe just spending, because now they're not spending the money on the drugs or the alcohol. Now they're spending it on stuff. Have you seen that happen?
Yes, people swap addictions all the time. We call it swapping addictions.
Oh, okay.
A person will, I think the one that comes to my mind most is that people will stop using drugs, and then become addicted to sex or intimacy or other people. Shopping is one, or work, because there's still, so one of the things that happens with addiction, and there's a lot of different science to support this, but I come from the framework that most people struggle with addiction because there's some underlying mental health issue that's not being addressed. So it could be mild depression, it could be mild anxiety, it could be voices. The swapping addiction, I think of, they go from opiates to alcohol. They'll go from cocaine to marijuana. So if you don't treat the underlying issue, because sometimes when a person stops using, the depression and anxiety, after a while, the brain does what it does and gets back to normal. But oftentimes when they stop, so they're self-medicating. I know you're familiar with the term. So they probably started using because of anxiety, start smoking a little weed because, oh, it calms my nerves, or start drinking because, I'm the life of the party, start using cocaine because, it lifts me up. But whatever it is, so a lot of that's probably anxiety or depression, some underlying. So they stop, and guess what's still underneath there? So they find something else not to deal with the underlying mental or emotional health issues. So they just swap it. You go from playing too many video games to just anything to almost kind of avoid dealing with yourself.
Wow. So you mentioned earlier that there are resources out there for not only families, but also for individuals, or who are looking to get help. But I do know that most of the time the big issue is everything costs money for people to get help. And so I like to hear, from your standpoint, what are there community resources that people can tap into that can help them with, maybe at least just getting on the journey? Because most people, if they know they have an addiction, and I'm not going to say everybody wants to break that habit, but there are some people who really would want support of someone professional to help them on the journey because they know their family is not effective in what they're doing.
So when it comes to the alcohol and drug addiction, oftentimes, many times, people can find a support in a recovery support group. You go to an AA meeting, an NA meeting, a CA meeting, there are like anonymous meetings everywhere. And though you don't get the professional help, you find yourself surrounded by supportive people. You start developing new connections. You start learning new coping skills. What I actually really love about the 12-step work is that it's spiritual in nature, but it's not necessarily a Christian kind of thing. If you're a Christian, then the higher power is God, is Jesus. If you're not, it can be whatever it is you want. So when it comes to those kind of addictions, AA is free, and they're probably as plentiful as most churches are. And many churches actually have support groups, celebrate recovery. So when it comes to the alcohol, the drugs, and it's great if you can come and sit down and talk to a therapist, and they help you process the information that you need to process. But that is a free resource. And many times in most communities, there are places where you can go to get support or treatment for little or no cost. I wish there were more professional resources that were free. It's not. And sometimes I think that has to do with the stigma of mental health, because the services are out there. Most of us, if you have a job, it would be like asking, if you have a heart disease, why don't you go to a cardiologist? Most of us find the resources to go to a cardiologist. But with mental health, because most benefits, there's mental health parity. Whatever benefits you have medically, you have it for behavioral health. Most organizations have EAP programs. We just don't use those because I think that the stigma of mental health, or we just don't see what's going on. I do want to say, if it's an issue like, and I know you know this, but I'm just going to repeat it from a non-medical view. if you're trying to get off alcohol or benzodiazepines, and if you're listening, if you know if benzo is Xanax, whatever, you need to go through a hospital or a detox program, because withdrawing from that, if you've been doing for a while, can be life threatening. So you go to the nearest emergency room, stabilize, and then you find treatment. But like I said, if you need a cardiologist, if you need a pediatrician, you can find a therapist. We're out there in agencies and in hospitals. We're there, but a lot of times we just don't access it because of the stigma that's associated with getting help. A lot of us believe pull yourself up by the bootstrap. One other thing I noticed with families and couples working with them, you'll have someone in the family who just quit cold turkey. Like, I just stopped. I decided one day I wasn't gonna use no more, and I'm not using. I stopped smoking the cigarettes. It was like, God. But if you truly are genetically predisposed, or your uses become to an addiction, whether it's a behavioral addiction, whatever, it's just not that easy to stop. So it is understanding that some people can stop. When I did prevention work with the kids, I would go around the room and look in it, like pretend like I look in their brain and say, hey, I can see in your brain, you don't have to, so go ahead and party. You're gonna be fine. When you're ready to stop, you're ready to stop. But oh no, not you. You have that addiction gene. If you start using, you're gonna be strung out. So don't start. So it's interesting, the couples that I have worked with, one partner just decided no more. I thought about it, was going to lose my kids, so I'm done. And there's the that other partner has that expectation that they're going to be able to quit. So they're less likely willing to go get treatment, because they should be able to do it just like their partner or just like their dad just quit. And I hear that story so often. It's just like, yeah, but you got the addiction. Not everybody in the family get it. You got it though.
And what's important, I got to really stress what you said, is that when people quit, there is a risk that they could have some medical problems. And we would not want someone just think, and many people do. Sometimes they'll just say, you know what, I decided I'm not going to do this anymore. But I do know, particularly with alcohol and drugs and things like that, those withdrawals, there's a period of DTs that's very critical, that they need to be supported with, fluids and nutrients and things, so that the body can actually come to homeostasis, almost balance out. And so I think that, we admire when people can quit and not have any health problems, but that would not be our recommendation, just simply because it could lead to some harmful outcomes, and we would not want that to happen. But one thing that you mentioned, Dr. Wilkerson, is you mentioned children, and we didn't really talk much about that, but I want to just in these last few moments talk a little bit about children. So we know that addictive parents sometimes have addictive children. Their children become addicted to maybe the same thing or something stronger than even the parent. So let's talk about children a little bit. So, my question to you would be, number one, what are some of the things that we can do to protect or to try to help children not become addicted? And then how do we recognize if a child has become addicted to some type of, alcohol or drug? Because sometimes the parents are so strung out, the alcohol is sitting, it's not locked up, the medications are sitting. So number one, how would we prevent it? Because we're always talking about prevention. But then the next question would be, is how would we recognize if a child has now began to exhibit addictive behaviors or some type of an addiction?
I think prevention starts with teaching kids ways to cope. I think as a parent, I have 2 teenage kids. It's a lot of education. It's having open conversations about what drugs are, just asking, who are your friends? What are your friends doing? Mine are emerging teenagers, and it is knowing what's going on in their world, being a parent, being educated about what's out there. I mean, I started working this addiction. I hadn't worked in addictions in a while, and there were so many new things. So I believe prevention starts at home. Conversations with your kid, noticing if anything is different. and of course, making sure that you are exercising good coping strategies with your kids. So I think that's the prevention. I love the programs at school, the DARE programs, but I don't even know if they really do those anymore. I know I've been involved with my kids and what they're learning about, but I think it's having more conversations about what's going on, what's stressing you out, how are you coping, what are you doing? Because I really think a lot of the reasons people use is because of underlying anxiety and depression and those things like that. I need to figure out how to cope. Um, because I've done this for a while, we put our kids in situations that, healthy situations that kind of stress them out so we can teach them how to de-escalate, let's go jogging, read a book. You're not going to watching out for addictive behaviors with video games, how often you're on that phone, how long you've been tick-tocking and flipping through the stuff. You look for those things and you start breaking those things. So just a quick example with my son, we noticed that he loves to play video games. But as parents, we also knew that those video games were little babysitters.
Mhm.
So in order to help him, we had to kind of rearrange how we did things. So, and not to say that we didn't spend time with him, it's just that we knew when we took the video game away from him, that would require us to make sure that we as parents filled his time doing things that would soothe him, that would that he would find that calms him and cope. And so I think that's one thing, parents, because you see if your kid is just doing something way too much, don't wait till they try the marijuana, because you know what's gonna. That was my husband. I was like, oh Lord, this boy look like he might have a little. He like playing this video game too much. What if he get a little taste of some alcohol and he's like this? So I believe prevention starts at home and conversation. Not say that a parent cannot have a drink or not play video games or anything like that, but being mindful of how your kids are coping with stressors, and just having conversations, knowing who their friends are.
Yes.
And then the second question was, I think I did kind of answer the identify.
You answered it. You surely did, because again, and I think that this next generation, I think, is going to be a little bit more difficult to read because they're on their phones a lot. They are. I mean, I see it with my I see it everywhere I go, honestly.
Yes.
Kids are constantly glued to those phones, and it's like, can you not just sit it to the side? I mean, we're having dinner, or we're having this, or we're having that. And so I think that you bring up a very good point, is if you're going to require them not to spend time on the phone or with the video game, then you have something for them to do that's productive. And then they can see that walking, jogging, reading, outdoor activity really is a good way to clear the mind.
Yes.
They have to be able to experience some type of coping mechanisms. We can't just say, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. So, we've talked about a lot, Dr. Sandra, and I really appreciate your time, but I would love to hear, like in our closing, I would love to hear like one of these wild stories that, that maybe someone was really, really, let's say, going in and out of therapy, and then they had a breakthrough and they walked away from whatever addiction they have. Would love to hear if you have a story like that.
I have tons of those stories, and that's why I do what I do. And actually, I was thinking about it. There's this young lady. I'm just gonna call her Katrina.
Okay.
She came to our detox program. Well, she was in detox, and she had lost her kids were in the custody of someone else. Some bad relationships, and she had an addiction that warranted her being on our unit. And she came in, and at this particular time, she was serious. And she enrolled in our MAT program. She enrolled in the MAT program, medication assisted treatment. Started the medications. There's a medication you can take when you are withdrawn from opiates, and that kind of helps reduce the craving. And on her path, because like I said, she had a lot of stresses going on. I'm thinking she had trauma in her childhood. She got involved in the program. She got a job. She was so excited. She bought her a car. She came in and visited me the other day, and she was like, Miss Sandra, I am going back to court soon and I'm going to get reunified with my son. I'm working, and she has so many stresses along the way because early recovery is really, really hard. You're having to learn how to do almost everything. If you think of someone who got in a bad car accident and they had to rehab their body, when you decide that you're going to stop an addiction, you have to rehab your whole mind, your spirit. And so we do see a lot of people who keep coming back. And but sometimes when it clicks, and you can tell. I mean, and she would come in and she would see me, how you doing? There were some bad days, and but I promise I'm not gonna go back. I'm not. And yesterday she bopped up in my little office like, yes. I said, girl, you sure are smiling a lot today. And she's like, I am happy. She walked out with the little papers that she needed to give to her caseworker. It was just so awesome. And it just makes me smile. And there's so many stories, that I've had throughout my career of people actually doing the hard work, being courageous, looking within. Because I think the hardest thing is, there's a cycle. You stop using, you get sober, and then you got to confront all the stuff that you did while you were high. Well, that is the one thing that will certainly have you wanting to use again. So it takes a lot of courage and a lot of support to look at the stuff that you did, or look at the stuff that other people did to you, and push through. Yeah. So Miss Katrina pushed through, and I am just really, really excited. And I look forward to seeing, there's a young lady who is cycling through, but she keeps coming back. She's a success story to me. It's just like, you know what, you're not giving up. Yes. So we tell them, we are here.
Well, I love that you said she's a success story, because she does keep coming back. She realizes that she needs help, and she's coming to get help where help it can be gotten. And I think that's, an absolute great way to put it, is that it is a success when people say, I need help and I know where to go to get help. Very much like that example you gave with heart condition. If someone needs a surgeon or cardiologist, they're going to go find them. And so your services are there to help people who have those addictions. And I really think that, especially during this time that we're in the pandemic, people have high stressors right now. A lot of things are going on. It is absolutely so critical that we know that there are support systems out there. There are resources. There are therapists out there who are willing to help through that journey, because again, it can't be easy, because many times it's all about coping with reality. And reality can be tough at times, difficult at times, stressors sometimes that we never thought we would ever face in our whole life. Those things are coming up. And so we have to be really mindful that there are the resources out there. Any last words that you would give Dr. Wilkerson?
Just don't give up. Mm-hmm. If you're struggling with an addiction, don't give up. But we have this saying that relapse is a part of recovery. I have this saying that a just man falls down 7 times, 70 times, and he just keep getting back up. Just keep getting back up. And if you are a loved one who is supporting someone, read a book, watch a YouTube video, find out as much as you can about that addiction so you can be supportive and not put your foot in your mouth when that opportunity comes, when they're reaching out for you for support. So that's it, find some therapy, do some therapy.
Yes. Well, I certainly appreciate your time. And, to our listeners, we are really just trying to get the word out that, addictions are a reality. People are struggling. And we want to let you know that there are resources, because our goal is to actually, and I love that you just incorporate the spiritual part of it, because it is really our spiritual being made in the image of God. There's times, like you said, you just all the time, you have to give them back to God and allow God to work in and through them. And there's really sometimes nothing we can do but pray, right? And so that's sometimes we just give it to God and then we pray. But I do know that what you provided with us today, Dr. Wilkerson, is so important for people to know that there is help and they should not give up. Thank you for joining us on Tree of Life. Until next time, be blessed and make sure that you provide anyone that you know with the support that they need to help get them to the place where God wants them to be. Be blessed. Until next time.
Bye-bye. Thank you, Dr. Sankey.
You are welcome.